Ladies and gentlemen, it's Sibernethy. Corporate greed is mathematically a stupid idea. It's not simply corrupt. It's blind and ignorant to very vital basic things in economics and business infrastructure. It is a chief sign of incompetence at executive level. Because if there's corporate greed at work in the world, it is a failure to understand economics, mathematics, commerce, and systems. And wherever there are failures in really important basic simple things like this at foundational level, invariably lead to collapse. The math eventually catches up with you, no matter how clever or extractive you are. It's a failure at a structural level. It's systemic blindness. You can't escape the outcome of something like this. The numbers eventually catch up to you. Debt isn't simply a financial concept. Have you ever heard of technical debt? Mechanical debt? When you start to chip away at a load-bearing support beam, what happens over time? It becomes weakened, and if it gives way, the whole thing crumbles. The foundation to the building collapses. And that's what's happening here. And wherever there is corporate greed, there is a fundamental blindness to a weakening and eventual collapse, gravitational collapse of the foundation that everything sitting on top of depends on to stay afloat. Entire systems of Byzantine red tape and corporate control and string pulling, it is financed by extractive mechanics. Now, what happens when the foundation gives out? The very layer of society, or the layer of any economic system, where the primary target of extraction becomes too weak to sustain the economic burden anymore. There is no golden parachute. That is a myth. That is a fantasy invented by the press meetings to help the upper management feel better. It's a stage curtain that eventually will catch fire. With mathematical certainty. Here's why. Once a company commits entirely to predatory and extractive mechanics as its profit system, its money-making system, it loses the ability and knowledge and memory of how to build. And every great empire must build first before it can extract revenue. But aside from the mechanical and structural implications of this, there is also a philosophical and mathematical misunderstanding of what it takes to sustain an empire, especially a corporate one. And it is this. It is essential to the long-term survival of any business to adopt the idea of profit as a necessity of function and not in itself an end. Any deviation from this core central idea is doomed to lead the business to failure. You cannot be a self-sustaining entity and a parasitic entity at the same time. The two are mutually exclusive. You must produce more value than you take from people. That's the golden rule of business. You're getting paid money for something that is worth more than its financial cost. You're giving people something more in value than they are paying for it. That's the golden rule of business. If this equation is reversed, you're in trouble. Because we invented a word for stuff like that. It's called robbery, fraud, theft, ripping someone off. None of those things carry positive connotations. They also set you up for liquidation of outstanding debts. And they will catch up to you with mathematical certainty. Because business is a man-made thing, and to some, an intellectual sport. But its operating mechanics were not made by man, therefore they cannot be changed by man. They belong to the universe and its greater functions. Debt is a vacuum. Liability is a vacuum. Taking more than from others than you are giving to them is a vacuum. And nature abhors a vacuum of any kind. Energy always returns to its source of origination. That's why we have rain. That's why we have agriculture. That's why a lot of things exist in stable, self-sustaining cycles. Fuck with that and pay the price. The reason why it seems today like these corporate greed empires are getting more aggressive and more desperate and more extractive, as the term emerging is, the only reason why they're getting more aggressive with that is because they know their power is about to run out. Their line of credit, their sources of extraction, it's all playing out. The well's about to run dry. They don't have a backup plan for this. They are delaying the inevitable. The effect of their negligence and incompetence is compounding. And they are losing control of their own businesses and their operating mechanics. They are losing control over their own systems. That is why they are working so hard and fighting desperately to maintain them. That is why you see what a company's true colors is in a financial crisis. Especially a global empire that has existed for many years. The second it faces extinction, or it starts to show signs that it's dying out, often it will turn to predatory systems, or it will try to do some crazy shit. But it doesn't work. It doesn't work because long term, it puts them closer to the grave. They're trying to fight against a current already too fast and close to the waterfall for them to escape. They're just buying time. But it's a foregone conclusion because they waited until it was too late to reverse. Because their ability to control it has been outpaced by the cumulative debt, we could call it, that they incurred. The consequences of their actions have a force and a magnitude and a rate of acceleration that has become too powerful for them to control. They are heading straight for the falls. And they had ample time to stop and fix these problems when they were small before they got large. But the reason why a lot of this got big in the first place, why small problems became big problems, is because people made a philosophical error in corporate leadership. And it is this: corporate greed is what you get when greed and gluttony sign a deal together. And the deal is to sink the entity that signs an agreement with them. It is a loan shark contract. And these corporate entities, they have not signed a deal with the devil. They have signed their own destruction at the hands of a two-headed dragon. Gluttony is the eternally open mouth of the beast with an appetite that can never be satisfied no matter how much you feed it. Once you start feeding it, it will demand more. As you feed it more, it will constantly need more to sustain itself. Once it gets to a certain size, it can no longer sustain itself on its own. So the architecture of greed is built to sustain it at scale. But eventually, the architecture fails because the beast's appetite has outgrown the capacity of the scaffolding and the architecture to sustain. So, the Ouroboros effect kicks in. The beast begins to consume the architecture and then itself. That's how nature handles things that expand infinitely but cannot sustain itself infinitely. Now do you see what I mean when I say energy always returns to its point of origination? That's how it settles vacuums and debts. We live in a universe that is governed by cycles. Nothing that seeks to operate in perpetuity can do so without embracing its own life and death cycles. This applies to corporations and business. Every business as you know it will eventually go out of business. But in its place, it will be reborn as something else. Where there is resistance or prolonged evasion of this process, the outcome is the same, but much more painful and sudden. It's the rubber band effect. The harder you stretch it, the more it's gonna sting when it flies back in your face. This is why corporate greed is mathematically a really fucking stupid idea. Because going through this process of breaking down why, it makes those living in denial look 10 times more foolish. They're all gonna die one day. What are they running from? Everything you know is going to cease to exist eventually, but only in its current form. It'll come back as something else. Everything as you know it may change faces, places, but they all come back. Stop running. You'll only be that much more exhausted when you finally give out.